The MiG-23MLD is a Soviet Tier-7 fighter, and to be honest, this plane is a complete joke. But to understand why I think so, we must first look at the performance. At a first glance, it might not seem too bad, and that is true for the top and stall speed, both being average if not better. The optimal speed is somewhat hard to maintain because of your below average energy retention. The speed bleed is less noticeable when your wings are fully extended. You also have the lowest thrust to weight ratio in this tier. But surprisingly, you regain your energy quickly and you can even outrun some planes, and the main thing that people complain about is the turn rate of 25 degrees a second. This might not seem too bad, but you can only achieve this rate with your wings fully extended. When your wings are swept back, you're a flying brick. If you want to have a chance in a dogfight, you need to slow down, which will make you an easy target. What about its offensive armament? Is it good? Well, the gun is. You get the 23mm GSH-23L, with 200 rounds when maxed. This is my favorite gun in the game. That's because it deals a lot of damage and has a very high rate of fire. It can be hard to aim with and requires a lot of trigger patience, but once you get used to it you'll like it. The best ammo belt is obviously the air targets belt. You get a wide variety of missiles, which I'll cover after I mention the countermeasures, which you get a total of 60, 30 flares and 30 chaff. It's not the highest amount, but considering you'll be dying often, it's enough to last a couple engagements. First missile that I'll cover today is this plane's stock infrared missile, the R-60. It's a rear aspect only infrared heat-seeking missile. Before 9.0 was released, this was the best Soviet missile, having a very good max G pull and being very light. Now, both of these things are still true, but when compared to other Tier 7 IR missiles, it's simply not that good anymore. It's a short-range missile. The farthest kill I've got with it is 2.5 kilometers. The flare resistance is also pretty low, often going for flares that the enemy didn't even deploy, not to mention the fact it's very hard to end up on someone's 6. Overall, not the best missile that you should only use if you have no upgrade points. The second missile you can purchase for the MiG-23 is the R-24T, an infrared all-aspect heat-seeking missile. It's the IR version of the R-24R. One of the biggest downsides of this missile is the fact it needs to fly for a decent amount of time before it can efficiently maneuver, and the max G pull isn't that good. It pulls just hard enough to hit the enemy. It also has a decent flare resistance, sometimes completely ignoring flares in rear aspect shots. The gimbal is also above average. However, this isn't really useful because you won't be firing it in high off-bore shots. Another downside is that it's very heavy and that it can only be put on the same hardpoint as the radar missiles, so you'll have to sacrifice your radar missiles if you want to equip it. The range is decent, so you can get some long-range kills with it. Otherwise it's a pretty mid missile. The R-60M is the first somewhat capable missile you can purchase for the MiG-23. It's the infrared all-aspect heat-seeking version of the R-60. The flight model is the exact same, but the launch capabilities are much larger now. I suggest that you fire it from very close ranges, otherwise it's easily flared, and just like with the R-60, the range is pretty low. This missile can hit from pretty close in a head-on, surprising the enemy who wasn't pre-flaring. The same can be said for rear aspect shots. You can fire it from less than a kilometer and still have it hit. If you can, I highly recommend that you get it. Just remember that it gets easily flared. The final and best IR missile you can purchase for this plane is the R-73. An infrared all-aspect heat-seeking missile. The R-73 is most known for its ability to pull insanely hard, sometimes being able to pull 180s. The range of this missile is much better than the one of the R-60, being able to hit targets as far as 6 kilometers away. However, These long-range shots are not recommended because the enemy can easily flare your missile. A better range to fire it from is 1 to 1.5 kilometers in head-ons and 0.5 to 1 kilometer in rear aspect shots. The flare resistance is also improved, being much harder to flare in rear aspect shots. If you're swimming in upgrade points, definitely get this missile. The only semi-active radar homing missile this plane can carry is the R-24R. It's actually not a bad missile, but it's being held back by the radar, which I'll cover shortly. The missile has the same issues as the R-24T. These issues being the fact that it simply doesn't turn at all for a bit of time after being launched, and when it does turn, it can be easily dodged if you know how to do it. The range is decent, but I recommend that you only fire it in head-ons or very close rear aspect shots, no more than 2 kilometers. It also shouldn't be fired from a longer distance, that is 7 kilometers in head-ons and 3 kilometers in rear aspect shots, because you'll give the enemy plenty of time to notch. I would recommend you to buy this missile, but the radar holds it back too much. You'll see why soon. Here's a couple recommended loadouts. In the last 2 loadouts, you can also equip one R-24R and one R-24T, but in the end, it's up to you to test these loadouts and pick the one that suits you the most. Now let's take a look at this mess of a radar. First, you'll notice that the type of the radar is not Doppler or multi-mode, but rather it's MTI or moving target intercept. This type of radar works similarly to a Doppler radar, so you might say, wow, this is awesome, but you can only be in this mode if you're below 1500 meters. Once you go higher, the MTI mode fucks off and you're left with a pulse radar, which gets affected by chaff and ground clutter. Yeah, not very fun. At least the detection range and Doppler filter are decent, so now you might be thinking, okay, I just have to fly lower than 1500 meters and I should be fine, right? Wrong. The search cone is what really sets this radar back. You have an insane 12 degrees of vertical scan, limiting your locking abilities to a somewhat small line, instead of the normal square every other plane's radar has. Here's a quick visual comparison if you weren't able to visualize this in your mind. This somewhat small search cone basically makes it very hard to crank in a head-on, putting you at a massive disadvantage if the enemy were to also fire a radar missile towards you. The RWR this plane gets is the one and only SP015. Here's a short guide on the basic stuff you need to know to correctly use it. Here are a couple very important things you need to remember if you hate yourself and decide to willingly fly this plane. You can pause the video to read the full text. Now it's time to finally complete this tier list by placing the MiG-23 into F tier. This one is pretty self-explanatory. You have mid-flight performance, a bad radar, suboptimal RWR and not so good missiles. So with that, the tier 7 tier list is complete. If you have any complaints, feel free to comment them. What do you guys think of the MiG-23? Do you think it should be put back into tier 6? Comment down below. With that said, I thank you for watching and I'll see you next year.